Samuel Wallace, who's the creative director at Western Carolina University, where they've been an integral team for the past 8 years. Proud alumnus of WCW, Sam graduated in 2016 and immediately began contributing to the university as a video producer. Over the years, they have advanced to their current role, overseeing a range of creative projects and teams within university communications and marketing. With 12 years of experience in mixing live sound, Sam brings a wealth of experience in the field of audio production. The dual passion for video production and sound mixing has positioned them as a versatile and knowledgeable professional in the industry. Today, Sam will share insights and best practices with fellow video producers, helping them enhance their audio production and post-production skills to create compelling and immersive audio-visual content. So, thank you, Sam, for being here.
Of course. How's everybody doing? Good. Thank you. That was an incredibly overdone introduction, but I appreciate it. Like I said, my name's Sam Wallace. By a show of hands, does anybody know where Western Carolina University is? Okay. Okay. Does anybody? Well, okay. Yeah, UTK is really close. We're a stone's throw from UTK by most standards. So we are in the western part of North Carolina. If anybody knows Asheville, North Carolina, big beer city, we're about an hour west of that. We are a 4-year regional comprehensive university. We have about 12,000 students right now, so we're a mid-sized university. And like you said, I've been with the university full-time for 8 years now. Started as the only video producers. Are there any solo video producers in the room? Yeah, a lot of you. We've since grown. As he mentioned, about 9 months ago, I assumed our creative director role after previously serving as our director of photo video. So we now have a full-time director of photo video who is kind of a hybrid role, but also doing a lot of project managing, and then 2 full-time video producers and 2 full-time photographers. So we've been very fortunate. Our team has been able to grow over the last 8 years, which is awesome. So real quick, as he mentioned, for me, audio is one of those things that in the video world, I went to film school, and even in film school, is something that is kind of put in the back seat. We really love to focus on what looks awesome, and then we get into editing and realize it doesn't sound awesome, and that can create a lot of headaches. And unfortunately, in the world we live for, one of the good things is people are listening to audio less, right? Most people are scrolling without the audio, but when they do, they will scroll faster past it if the audio is bad and the visuals are good. You can't get away with bad audio as easy as you can get away with user-generated video these days, right? So that's why it's really important. How I came to love it so much, I've been a musician since I was in middle school, played the trumpet in the marching band, all the things, right? I'm not a talented musician, right? I play a little acoustic guitar, that's it. That's not my thing. But what I found was when I got into video production, my love for music kind of intersected with that technology, right? And so this is me. I look really upset in this photo, but this is me behind a sound console, and most of my audio experience comes from the live world. Whether it's regional bands, I mix for Elevation Church, whoever it is, I spend a lot of time behind a live console. And so this is what I consider like my second happy place, right? And that's actually my twin brother to the right. He's a professional lighting designer. He works in live production full time. And so I've been very fortunate to work alongside him in the audio space. And so I spend a lot of time outside of my 8 to 5 doing this. This is a theatrical production. So I had to fly in yesterday and change my flight from Sunday because Elevation needed me somewhere in South Carolina on Sunday to mix, and Friday night before that I was mixing a little rock cover band in a regional concert. So this is like my happy place here. It's the only thing I would leave my current job to do full time would be to mix sound full time. But that being said, it's allowed me to bring that passion into kind of the post-production world, and there's a lot of value to doing audio well in video. And so we're going to talk about a lot of those things. I want this to be as practical as possible. Not going to be a lot of theory here. We're going to get into the weeds on best practices, some of the tools you can use, some of the tools that you could get access to outside of whatever your editing program is that it has built in. And I want to make sure that as we go or at the end, if you have questions, let me know, because especially when we get into a lot of audio processing, we know what video effects do, but if you slap a compressor on a clip, the knobs and the meters and the numbers are really confusing and can be a little overwhelming. So I want to make sure we have time to tackle as much of that as possible so that you kind of get all your questions answered. So we're going to go through a little bit of the production side. I know most people just want to focus on how can I fix my bad audio in post, but it really does make a huge difference to do it correctly in production. And so we're going to start there, spend a little bit of time there, and then we'll move into post-production. So first thing, there are tons of different microphones that could be used. We're going to focus on the two that this group probably faces with a choice every day they go out and shoot. And that's between, these are both condenser microphones, but one's a lavalier like I'm wearing right now, and one's a shotgun. Both of these are going to recreate sound fairly naturally and in good quality. It's really about what you need for your production. So shotgun microphone is always my preference if the subject is not moving. If it's an interview and they're just going to sit there the whole time and it's only one person, a shotgun is always going to be my preference. And the reason for that is that because of where it's positioned in relation to the subject, it right out of the camera or right out of the recorder, it's going to have a much more natural sound to it. As soon as you put a lavalier on someone's chest, you're introducing a lot of boominess because of where the microphone is placed. It's just going to require more processing in post, right? But if you've got more than one person or they're moving while they're talking, unless you've got a 12-person crew and somebody's willing to boom a microphone, a lavalier mic really is your best option. So those are really that's really the decision you have to make. The biggest technical difference between the two generally is that the shotgun mic's going to have a very directional pickup pattern, and the lavaliers are going to be very omnidirectional. So I could take this microphone and place it upside down, and it's more or less going to still capture my voice. The shotgun mics, as soon as you come out of line with the pickup pattern, it's going to fall off really hard. And then you're going to have to do a lot to get that audio recovered in post. So choose wisely here, but it's really about what you need. There's not one that's better than the other. One is just more convenient for other things. And then this one is interesting because it's shifting really quickly. And who is doing most of their video shooting on mirrorless, like A7s or, okay. Anybody using FX9s, FX7s, those sorts of things? Okay. So the benefit to those cameras is that most of them have full-size XLR inputs on them, right? A lot of the DSLR-like or the mirrorless photo options don't have those options yet. So there's always a question of whether you should record your audio into the camera directly or with an external audio device. Again, this is about whatever your situation is. You are much more limited with cameras that only have a 3.5 millimeter mic jack in them. And a shotgun mic, for instance, you could buy a Rode video mic that goes straight into it, and you could run an extension or put it right on the camera, but it really limits your flexibility. As where with cameras that have XLR inputs, you can run a hot track and a safe track, you've got full phantom power on it, you have many more options. So that's the biggest thing to consider when you're considering whether to go straight into the camera or with an external audio recorder. But now, more than ever, the technology has gotten so good that most audio recorders are coming out with a 32-bit float option. And if you've not kind of dove into what 32-bit float is, it basically expands the dynamic range, just like you would in light for a camera or for a sensor. It expands the dynamic range of the recorder exponentially. Most companies will claim that you cannot clip a 32-bit float recorder. You could jack the microphone gain as high as you want. If when you bring it into post, you can recover it and it's not going to sound clipped or digital or anything. It'll sound pristine. That's not entirely true. You can clip anything if you try hard enough. But the 32-bit float is huge, especially if you're a solo video producer. You can set the gain, you can get the waveform to where it looks like you're getting healthy audio. You hit record, make sure your microphone's placed well, and then you don't have to touch the recorder. Obviously monitor it to make sure that you don't have any technical problems, but as far as if someone starts getting louder or softer, you don't have to monitor those things. You're not going to clip the audio because that dynamic range is so wide. So I would encourage you, if you've not spent a ton of time looking into 32-bit float, to do that. Yeah.
I've seen some that were wireless lavalier.
Sure.
32-bit float. Are those worth it, or are they just?
So they are. In this one, I don't know if this is the newest DJI mic that I have on me, but DJI and Rode both have come out with a 32-bit option. And the nice thing about those, and they're actually on a list that I'm getting to, you can record to the camera with the normal audio coming off the wireless pack, but then to record the 32-bit, it records to a micro SD card in the actual microphone, in the pack. And so they are useful. If you're gonna use lavaliers a lot, you're gonna have to sync it up in post, right? But you can throw it on someone, hit record, and you don't really have to worry about whether or not they're going to blow the mic out or not. And there are a few Tentacle, if anybody's ever used any of the Tentacle Sync products, they were kind of the first ones to introduce that. Theirs record straight to the mic pack, but don't have an option to record to the camera. But Rode and DJI have just come out with those options. So definitely look into it. It's one of those things where, just like video technology with autofocus or whatever, it just feels like we are spoiled right now. But I encourage you to take advantage of 32-bit float if you can get access to it. And the last thing, this is always big for me, my team hears this a lot. Make sure you have your headphones when you record. I know this seems like a simple one. Even if you buy $5 earbuds off Amazon and throw them in every camera bag you have something to make sure that if you see meters, you assume it's good, but there could be a buzz, there could be a hum, there could be something, right? And whatever you do, if you want to use your fancy active noise cancellation headphones, awesome. Don't turn that on when you're monitoring the audio in the field, because it'll give you a false sense of security. I know people love those headphones, but they're not good for production. So just remember your headphones. And speaking of gear, these are just a few things. A couple of these I mentioned. I could talk about gear all day, so if you need to talk more, you can come see me afterwards. These are some of my favorite tools out there. The Sennheiser MKH416, I've been using that shotgun mic for a really long time. It's a pricier, it's a $1,200 shotgun microphone. But I could throw it against that wall, pick it up, and use it. It is incredibly durable. It's incredibly sensitive and reproduces a really great natural sound. This Zoom F6 recorder is one of Zoom's newer external recorders, and this is one of their 32-bit float options. It's got 6 inputs. Does full 32-bit float. It's also got a time code input, so if you have some time code sync equipment, it will work with that. And it's also very well built. Yeah.
Does 32-bit float come from the actual mic or from the recorder?
It's from the recorder. Yeah. You will now, in this case, right? 32-bit might be built into this microphone, but that's because there's also a recorder in this. So you're looking for the 32-bit float on the recorder side, not the microphone side, unless it's a combo like this. The Sennheiser EW wireless is kind of a legacy. Sennheiser's been in that wireless space for a long time. I like these because, again, I could throw it against the wall, pick it up, and use it. If you're miking athletes or football players or things like that, I would never put one of these plastic lav mics on a football player for a mic'd up practice. But I will gladly strap that to whatever it will, on his pads or whatever, and know it's going to be fine. So if you're looking for a wireless option that doesn't necessarily need to record to the microphone or have that 32-bit float, that's a good wireless option. The Rode Wireless Pro is that new set of wireless, much like this DJI set, that has the 32-bit float built into each pack. And you can run 2 of those lavs with 1 receiver going into your camera. So it's a good option if you're run and gun, you're one person, you need 2 lavs, you can get 2 at one time. And when it records into your camera, most of those DSLR cameras record a stereo audio track. It'll put one person's lav on the left side and one on the right side, and then you can split them in post and have both separately. And then these bottom two are a little bit more post-production utility. The bottom left one is a Shure MV7. If anybody's interested in doing podcasting or anything like that, that's what I recommend this microphone for. If you're doing any kind of radio production or anything like that. I just put it up here because it's a great mic for those sorts of things. It's XLR and USB, so you can plug it straight into your computer and not even need an audio interface. And then the AKG C214, the 414 is well known in the live sound space for miking guitar amps or drum overheads. It's a large diaphragm condenser. It's got a big sound, and it's very naturally reproducing. The 214 is kind of their baby version of that. It's just got a hypercardioid pattern on one side. It doesn't record on both sides of the mic. And it is great for voiceovers. If you're doing any voiceover work, I keep one of these on a stand plugged into my audio interface in my office so that if somebody comes in and needs to do a voiceover, this is set up and ready to go. So these are just some of my favorite tools. There is so much audio gear out there that we could spend the next 2 hours talking about it, but I wanted to just mention a few of those. And would be more than happy to talk with anybody if you need other suggestions. So we're gonna move in to kind of the post-production side. But one thing that kind of goes from production to post-production is gain staging. If you've heard the term gain staging before, you hear it a lot in the music production world. Music producers and post-production mix engineers are always talking about their gain structure and their gain stage. So this is obviously not written in stone, but this is a good idea of where to start with your levels when you're recording. When you're recording, you obviously, again, let's assume we don't have 32-bit float and we're just recording 16-bit. You want to keep your recording within that -18 and -6 decibel range so that there's little to no chance of you crossing the 0 dB threshold and losing the audio completely. It will not be recoverable after that. So that's a good place to start. If you set this too high, you'll clip. If you set your initial recording gain too low and then have to boost it in post-production, you'll introduce a whole lot of noise to that audio. So it's important to get this right when you're in production. 32-bit makes it a whole lot easier. You can run it a lot hotter and feel safe about it. But most importantly, never run it so low. Don't be so skeptical about it that you then bring it up in post and it's just noise everywhere, because then you'll have a much harder time getting that stuff out. When you move that audio from recording into mixing, you kind of want to get that level to a -6 to -3. That 3 decibels of headroom leaves you headroom for mastering the entire video and getting the most loudness you can out of the final product. But getting it in the -3 to -6 allows you to add your music or other effects without your overall video clipping. Because we live in a digital world, you can... This is referenced as a dBFS, which is decibel compared to the full spectrum. So in the digital world, you can cross that 0 decibel threshold and it still sound okay. But once it gets converted to analog, that's when the analog conversion can cause it to sound distorted. So you want to keep it in that range. And then your mastering, which is your last stage, I've got a plugin we'll get to at the end that's really great for mastering that will maximize the loudness of your video. So when you upload it, you've got the maximum amount of loudness that you can. In the music world, there's a huge push right now to master music as loud as possible without clipping it. And so we tend to do the same with video. When someone goes on YouTube, we want to make sure that the audio is as loud as possible without clipping. That way they get a good experience. So let's get into post-production. First things first, project organization is really important. This is an old Pro Tools session. This is not a massive session by any means, but you can see here the video's on top. I was just doing audio in this. I brought the final locked version of the video in and just did the audio here. But there's a track for the voiceover, there's a track for the music, there are multiple tracks for all the different effects. and they're all labeled very clearly, and I know where they're at. I get onto my team a lot because if I go into a video to do some like final tweaks and there's crap everywhere, right? Nothing's labeled correctly. If there are 3 interviews, all of their audio interviewers on the same track, that's the easiest way to get me mad. And so they like to give me crap for that. But you want to organize it in a way so when you go to process that audio, you know where everything's at and you know what you're affecting and what you're not affecting. So it's just really important that you stay organized when you start moving your audio into your post-production. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have kind of like a recommended methodology for how separate, like you said, each interview or whatever on a separate track?
Sure.
Like grouping it, like I don't even know, like sound effects? And
Sure. So in this one, it depends on how much you're working with. Definitely each different interview subject on its own track. Because you can process their interview on the entire track rather than the individual clip. But if you try and do that with 3 different people on one track, you're going to try and tailor the effects to one person and it's going to mess somebody else's up and vice versa, right? So definitely a different track for each interview. And then depending on how many effects, I group them onto the tracks based on what I know I'm going to process together. So if I have a string of ambient sound effects that I know I'm going to process the exact same way, I'll put them on the same track. If I'm going to process them differently, I'll move them to another track so that it's easier to do that. But other than that, it's really kind of as granular as you want to go with it. But separating the dialogue out into individual tracks is by far the most important one. One other thing, if you're using a camera that allows you to record a hot track and a safe track, where you can record one input to 2 different tracks on your camera, I see a lot of people bring that footage into post-production and they'll leave both of those audio tracks live. You don't need both of them. One was a safeguard, one was try to get the best level possible. So what you need to do is if your hot track is good and it's not clipping anywhere, then either delete or disable the other track because you don't need it. Not only are you just adding audio on top of more audio, but you're also having to double your processing. If you're doing any processing to one, you've got to do the same to the other. So just get rid of it or disable it. And then edit your audio. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So you're working on Pro Tools, right?
So let's get to that right now. I'll go ahead and cover this. I am a staunch Adobe loyalist until about 3 months ago. I've edited in Premiere Pro for as long as I can remember, since I was in high school. And then did most of my audio work in Pro Tools. I've actually switched completely to DaVinci Resolve. Who in here is using DaVinci? Does anybody know Brett Sispansky? I don't know if you guys know him. He helped put on the conference, but he has been at the university with us for about 1.5 years now, and he's been preaching the gospel of DaVinci Resolve since the day he walked in the door, and he finally got me to switch. I recommend DaVinci Resolve highly because it's got the Fairlight audio engine built into it along with the video editing side, plus their incredible color tools. The audio Fairlight engine does anything that you would need to do in Pro Tools or Adobe. My problem with Adobe over the last 5 years has been that the program just doesn't run, right? Unless you've got a $30,000 computer, you can't even scrub the timeline. So that's kind of what caused me to move. But instead of me having to round trip audio out of Adobe into Pro Tools and then back into Premiere Pro, I can now just do it all in DaVinci. So that's kind of my DaVinci spiel, yeah.
Is DaVinci subscription-based or is it a one-time?
So there's actually a free version, and it, as far as I know, has almost everything you would need in the free version. If you want a paid license, it's a one-time perpetual license. So unlike Adobe, you pay for it once and you've got it. If you buy their micro color panel or their speed editor, their hardware, those come with Resolve licenses. So if you thought about getting one of the DaVinci color panels to do your color correcting with, it will come with a DaVinci license. So that's one of the big advantages with Blackmagic right now is that they've done a lot of work on this software, and they include it with a lot of their product. Yeah.
So does Pro Tools have like a video monitor that you can reference?
It does. So Pro Tools, it lets you bring one track of video in, right? You're not going to do any video editing in Pro Tools, but you at least have the video edit there to reference as you're doing the audio, which is really important. Yeah.
When you export, can you export with the video as well? Or just
You cannot. You're just exporting the audio. You'd have to bring that exported audio back into Premiere or whatever you're using and do a master render there.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you're editing out your audio, edit it like you would your video. Take time to go through and take the nonsense out, especially with dialogue. Add crossfades to the beginning and end of every clip. You can select them all, set up a shortcut to add audio dissolves, and it will make the transition of your dialogue in and out a whole lot better. This is a podcast edit, and so there's a ton of editing in this, but once I do the edit, I select it all, add the cross dissolves, and I'm done, right? I can move on to my processing. But if you start leaving things in there where you're getting background noises or you're getting coughs or you're getting whatever, it's going to be really distracting later on. So just take the time to do this. So now we're going to get kind of into the weeds on audio processing. We're going to talk about compression and we're going to talk about equalization. Those are the main two tools you're going to be using when you're processing audio, especially dialogue. Compression is one of those things that people don't often understand. If you ask someone what a compressor does, they say it levels out my audio, right? But so it's one of those things that people don't have a ton of understanding of, but this is a great visualization of what a compressor does. A compressor is reducing volume by a certain rate of any audio over a certain threshold. So if it hits -6 dB and goes over that, the compressor starts to reduce it by whatever ratio I've set. What that does is levels out your audio, right? These higher parts, these louder parts are now more closely aligned with the quieter parts. You then often have to boost the entire thing to get the audio back to a level that you need it to be. But that's the really dumbed down version of what a compressor does. It has a lot of side effects to it as far as the tone of the sound, but that's what it's doing. If you've got a speaker that's really dynamic and all over the place, this is the first tool you should be reaching for to help kind of glue that track together. This is what one would look like. This is the one in DaVinci Resolve. It's very similar whether you are in Premiere Pro or Pro Tools. I'm going to walk through what some of these knobs are doing and what they're referenced to, and just stop me if you have questions, but I really want everybody to understand what this is doing when you apply it to a track. And so the first thing you'll see is this threshold knob. This is a Dynamics plugin, so it's got a couple of other things, but the compressor settings are here in the center. The first thing is this threshold knob. That threshold is at what level the compressor is going to start reducing the gain of the audio. So this one I've got it set to -22.9. So anytime the audio level goes above -22.9, the compressor is going to start reducing the gain. Next to that is the ratio. That is the amount of reduction it is doing per decibel that it goes over that threshold, right? So 4 and 5 to 1 is a great kind of starting point for dialogue because it doesn't over compress it, but it does it enough to kind of level it out. So the higher that number, the more gain reduction there is going to be per decibel over that threshold. The knee is not something, the knee is basically adjusting the curve of that angle. Plugins sometimes will just have a 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes they'll have a full 0 to 100. You just kind of dial that in to smooth it out, but you don't have to overdo that. It's just smoothing out the transition between the normal audio and the audio that's being reduced in gain. Down below the attack, hold, and release are how quickly the compressor is going to react to the audio that it's being fed. How long it's going to hold that gain reduction, and how quickly it's going to release that gain reduction. With dialogue, you really just want fast attack, fast release. Now, you don't want this set to 0 milliseconds, right? Because then it's going to hit the audio hard. In live sound, I use kind of a 10-10-10 rule, 10 milliseconds of attack, 0.10 milliseconds of hold, and 10 milliseconds of release. That's where I start. Some programs are going to offer you that level of detail. DaVinci, for instance, On the release, the fastest release I can get is 50 milliseconds, but that's okay. That's still really fast. And that's because you're just trying to level the dialogue. This is not a bass drum in a drum kit or overheads on a drum kit where you're trying to squash the sound. You're really just trying to level it out. So the fast attack and fast release does it in a way that it doesn't add a whole lot of extra character to the sound that could be negative. Any questions about this? Yeah.
This is something that I struggle with when I'm trying to do it. Like, what do you base where you set the threshold at? Like, what do you base that off of?
So, and I should have said this at the very beginning, all these knobs mean nothing if you don't listen to it, right? So, depending on what your input is from the source will determine where that threshold sits, right? If you've got kind of a quiet source that's only peaking every once in a while, you may have to run that threshold way down to get to the point where it's actually doing anything. But that goes back to the importance of that gain staging. If you're staging your gain appropriately before you start processing, you're never going to have to run that threshold way down to get any use out of it. You should be setting the audio to a level to where you can start bringing that thing down really slowly and it will start reducing the gain. So you do have to just play with it. And most of them have that gain reduction meter. When you start seeing that gain reduction meter light up, you'll know it's doing something.
So would it be safe to say that you want to have it be, I don't know, this is how it's going in my brain right now. You want it to be lower than the stuff that obviously you want to bring down.
Sure.
But higher than the...
Correct.
That level and the level of the stuff that's at an okay place.
Correct. It's going to be kind of in between. It's really never going to come much further below those peaks that you're wanting to reduce. Because the further you bring it down, the more of the audio it's going to compress, and then everything can really start to sound flat. You still want to keep some dynamics in the dialogue, right? You want when someone gets excited for it to have more energy than the quiet parts, but you just don't want it to clip or be... for it to hurt to listen to. So the biggest thing with a compressor is it's very easy to run that threshold down really low and get a really even sound, but then it just sounds dull and it sounds boring and it sounds flat. The one thing I didn't mention is that makeup gain slider over there. Sometimes it's a fader like that, sometimes it's a knob. That's taking the processed audio and then readjusting the output post-compressor. So when you're leveling out that volume, you're essentially bringing the volume down of the dialogue, right? That makeup gain allows you to then raise the overall volume of that track so that you get kind of back to that -6, -3 range. This is when you'll start noticing that you introduce noise to the audio, right? If you're boosting it too much, you're going to start hearing noise. So you just have to find a balance of the right amount of volume and the right amount of noise. We're going to get to some noise reduction tools that make our lives a whole lot easier these days, easier than it's ever been. That will help with that. Anything else on the compressor? Yeah.
Compressor versus limiter?
They're the same thing. Here, there's two separate settings for it, right? They essentially do the same thing. Most limiter plugins will not have the vast array of adjustments you can make to it, but you will hear, especially in the music world, you'll hear people refer to a compressor or to a limiter interchangeably. So limiters are great on your master bus. You want to keep everything below, -0.5 or whatever to keep it from clipping. It's a very simple threshold. How fast is it going to hit it? But they're essentially the same tool. Anything else on the compressor?
Can you go over that 10-10-10 order?
Yeah, so I always start with 10 milliseconds of attack, 0.10 milliseconds of hold, and 10 milliseconds of release. That's what I would consider a fast compressor, but it's not gonna squash your audio and make it very apparent that you're compressing it. Yeah, you can, if it feels like it's squashing it too much, run the attack and the release back some, right? Give it more time until it sounds, dial it into taste, till it sounds as natural as you want it to sound. This is just an example of what the audio waveform actually looks like pre and post compression. So what you're seeing is that these really high peak values are getting squashed and some of these lower ones, because you're boosting the volume of the entire signal afterwards, are getting louder. And that's when using your EQ to combat some of the negative effects that a compressor has come into play. So that's what we're going to get into next is EQ. If you take a picture of anything, this is one of the most helpful tools I've ever found. You can find this on the internet too. Look up vocal cheat sheet, EQ cheat sheet. Video producers are not orally trained, right? Musicians and sound engineers spend a lot of time doing oral training so that when they hear a sound, whether it's from a voice or an instrument, they know the frequency range that it sits in, right? And each of these frequency ranges have a characteristic to them. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Some of them respond very differently, whether it's a male or a female vocal. So I'm going to run through some of these. I've taken an audio clip from a radio interview that one of our climate professors did recently. It's on a Shure MV7, one of those more podcast type mics. So it's got a different sound than a shotgun mic would have. But I've gone through here, and in each one of these, I've boosted that frequency range of that clip. Now, I don't know how good these speakers are going to be, but it should give you an idea of what part of his voice is being affected by that frequency range. Anything 20 hertz, 80 to 80 below, this stuff down here, in most of what you're doing, you don't need it. You can use this sharp shelf here. That's going to get rid of any rumble, any low room noise. You don't need it. Anything above 100 hertz at that point is what's in your vocal. Anything below 100 hertz is negligible return for the vocal. So it's easier to just get rid of it. So I don't have an example for that because you wouldn't really hear anything in his voice. You would just hear the AC in the room get louder, right? So this is the 100 to 300 hertz range. You'll hear, this says core vocal frequency.
Maine to Texas, we do this. We're literally...
You'll hear a lot of people refer to this as the body of the voice. That 200 hertz range is really important for the body of a voice. With male vocals, too much of this can get really boomy, and so it just sounds like this does, and it just sounds thick, and there's no clarity to it. But if you take too much out, then the vocal will start sounding thin. So this one you really want to dial in so that the voice sounds natural but not overly boomy.
We just can't. Well,
this one is the 350 to 600 hertz, the 500 hertz range. You'll hear this referred to as the box region a lot. Sorry, I don't know why this isn't playing. Okay, maybe we're not going to listen to that one.
the moment.
Yeah, that one worked, but this one, sorry, it's not playing. This one, it's the boxy region of the voice is how you'll hear it referred to a lot. It adds a lot of mid-range, just mud to the voice. And so almost always on vocals, whether it's male or female, you'll be dropping some EQ. Don't pay attention to these lines on this EQ. This is not what a vocal EQ chart would look like. It's just showing you the regions. You would never probably dip it that much, but you will generally dip some of that range to just kind of add some clarity to the voice. The next one, the mid-range bite, a lot of people call this the telephone frequency. It's in the 2K range, and you'll hear why people call it telephone region.
At the moment, we spend billions.
These speakers aren't
pumping sand
representing it super great.
Oceanfront properties.
For male vocals, sometimes you have to add some of this to add some clarity. I have a female coworker who hosts a podcast on campus she's got a very loud voice. And her main vocal range, the harshness of it sits in this range, and I have to take a lot of it out, right? So if you're hearing a lot of harsh, just raspiness to a vocal, the 2K range is a good place to start with pulling some of that out. And I encourage people all the time, go in here, turn an EQ on, and drag it as high as you can go on a frequency range and see what it sounds like. And if that is unflattering, you can then reduce it to taste, but at least you know kind of what you're affecting. This sibilance zone, most people probably deal with a lot of S's, things like that are it's just like all you hear when someone's speaking is this in their voice. That's what this 5 to 8K range. It usually sits for males in the 4 to 5 and for females 6 to 7K range. I've got a plugin I'll show you that is basically a compressor that just deals with this frequency range. That's a really helpful tool. But you can also dial these frequencies back with an EQ to help reduce some of that extra S stuff. And then the top part, this is one that I feel like goes overlooked by most people. It's the 10 to 20K range. It adds a lot of clarity to the vocal. It adds a lot of air. Let me see if this one's working. It's not something that is super noticeable until you do it, and then it adds a lot of life. None of these are playing. Oh well. Adds a lot of life to the vocal. So this is just a really great cheat sheet to keep on your desk or to set up a preset in your program so that you have a decent starting point with vocals. But understanding how these frequencies sound and how these ranges sound will make you much more efficient in post-production. Because when you listen to the raw audio, when you listen to it, you'll have a decent understanding of where you need to reduce signal and where you need to boost it. This is what a fairly basic vocal EQ might look like. Again, this is a male vocal. That 200 hertz, because this microphone has a lot of that low mid-range 200 in it. So I'm doing some reduction in 200. I'm doing quite a bit of reduction in that 500, because especially for podcast or radio, pulling that 500 out is what gives it that broadcast sound. And then I'm adding some 2K, some telephone frequency, and then I'm boosting kind of a shelf of those 10 to 20K frequencies just to add some clarity and add some air. So let's see if these work.
The moment.
So this is pre-EQ.
Billions of dollars pumping sand in front.
A lot of boominess, right? Not a lot of high end, not a lot of clarity.
This is everywhere from Maine.
This is post. Just kidding. No. Okay, hold on. No, we're gonna make this happen because I have them on my computer. So. Let me just play it real quick.
The moment
this is post EQ, right? The boominess is gone. There's more clarity.
Oceanfront properties, and again, this is everywhere from Maine.
This becomes really important in video when you start adding music and sound effects underneath this, right? If you have a music bed and there's no high end on your vocal, it will not cut through the music. So this is by itself and you hear a huge difference. If I was to add a music bed underneath this, you would notice a substantial difference with the clarity of the vocal on top of that music.
Hearing to believe.
What time is it? I want to make sure. Oh, we need to move. Sorry. Music, EQ is not just for vocals. This is great for music. Sometimes music just feels like it's in your face, right with the vocal, right? It doesn't sit well in the mix. EQing your music is one good way to get it to sit back further in your mix. So reducing some of that low end that's just really loud and some of that high end that is competing with your vocal range creates more room for that vocal. So this would be something that I would maybe do to a music track that's up underneath an interview or something, and that's just, again, to make room for that. Let's see if this plays at all.
The moment we spend billions of dollars pumping sand in front of oceanfront properties, and again...
So that's I guess just none of the post ones won't work. This is post.
At the moment, we spend billions of dollars...
There's no volume difference between the music track from this, right? It's just the EQ taking out those low and high ends out of the music to allow the voice to cut through a little bit more.
Build one giant beach with a few gaps in between, and it's almost entirely done with public funds. And what we're
now everything's just playing.
Is taking a serious look at where...
Okay. So don't think that EQ is just for vocals. You can use it on sound effects, anything, to make it fit kind of into your mix better. Any questions on EQ before we move on? Okay. Another important thing to remember is the order of these effects on your audio makes a huge difference, right? I was talking about how when you compress audio and you boost the lower end of the vocal range and you're kind of reducing the higher end, it does make the sound boomier, right? So I prefer, again, this is a lot of personal preference, but I prefer to EQ my audio into the compressor. I know that the compressor is going to boost the 200 range, right? So I will pull some of that out before it hits the compressor so that it's a little bit more natural when it comes out of the compressor. And then generally any other effects you add will be after the compressor. If you're adding a de-esser or reverb, or if you're adding any other effects, generally do that afterwards. The one thing I didn't put in here is if you're doing noise reduction, that needs to be at the very top of your chain, right? So this is DaVinci Resolve, and I wish you could change the default, but you can't. The default is to run effects into the dynamics, which is your compressor, and then into your EQ. You can go into that and it will let you swap that however you want. So that's one of the first things I do when I go in here is change it to where my EQ is going into my dynamics and then the rest of my effects are coming afterwards. So that's just something you have to pay attention to. All audio effects are going to have a relation to another effect you put on it. They're never independent of each other. It all works together. So some advanced things I want to go through, and some of these I would find it hard to call them advanced because they're so simple to use, but I think they're worth knowing about. The first one is noise reduction. If you're not using DaVinci Resolve has the best noise reduction, the best built-in noise reduction plugin of any software I've ever used. It is scary how good this plugin is. If you're not using Resolve, if you're using Premiere or Media Composer, or you're doing work in Pro Tools, Waves makes a plugin called Clarity VX. It's a fairly new plugin over the last year. It's also a one-knob solution for noise reduction, and it uses AI to determine what it's reducing, and it does a pretty good job. It can be, much like Premiere Pro is, it can be pretty taxing on your computer. So generally, if you're using a plugin like that, that's using a lot of resources on your machine, I suggest just processing your audio with the noise reduction, bouncing that out or exporting it out, bringing it back in, and then moving on with your project. Don't have it running as you're editing because it will really slow you down. That plugin uses a lot of resources. I've not found that so much with the DaVinci one. It seems to be pretty light on CPU usage, so it doesn't affect your editing experience as much. Any questions about these? Noise reduction, do not use the one built into Premiere Pro. It is trash. That is the quickest way to destroy the clarity and the natural sound of your dialogue is to use that plugin. It has some adjustments where you can tell it what kind of frequency range to be looking to reduce, but until they come out with their new AI version, the one that's built in is just not near as smart as these two are. And you're going to spend more time trying to EQ the noise reduced audio than any benefits you're going to get from using it. Yeah.
So you've got it as shown on the DaVinci Resolve at 100%.
Yeah.
You run it at 100%?
Not usually. Usually to taste, right? Jack your speakers up, listen to the noise and the noise floor, and dial it in. When you think it's done enough, stop. Don't run it all the way up just to run it all the way up. So having a little bit of noise in your dialogue is sometimes okay, right? You're never going to completely get rid of it. So you really just have to listen and dial it in. I will say with the DaVinci one, even just putting it on 10 does a world of difference. Let me see if these play, because this audio is from an interview that our team did with a student who basically whispers. And it was in the library, the AC was running. There's a lot of ambient noise in the room, and I was shocked at what this plugin did to improve it. Let's see if this plays.
I thought it was just stress, and I wasn't listening to my body.
You hear all that?
There was something more. I thought I was going to have the answer. I was feeling ill. I thought it was just stress, and I wasn't listening to my body.
That's the built-in plugin in Resolve.
I thought I was going to have the answer.
Just a quick note on that. I use it too, but I think it's only in the paid version.
Okay, that's a good point. Free versus... Yeah, I think the paid version of Resolve is like a one-time $200 or $300. $300. That is a steal for what you're getting, because you're getting color, motion graphics, editing, and audio post-production all in one program. So. Correct. Yeah. So with all of our podcast production, we're fortunate. We have a studio space that's really quiet. It's well treated, but there's always going to be a little bit of room noise, right? I'll put this on every single track at 10, and it just cleans it up. If you're shooting a talking head or an interview in a room that it has a lot of reverb or echo in it, this will help take that out. And the one in Resolve does it better than anything I've ever seen. The Clarity VX one does it really well. And you can get it for like $30 on sale through Waves. So if you're not using Resolve, it's worth the $30 you would spend to clean up the noise if you're using Premiere Pro. Yeah?
Is that going to work with Audition as well?
It will, yeah. So any software that I put in, all my plugins work. So you do have to buy them per user, but their cloud license management has gotten better. So usually you can just log into your account on whatever computer you're using and activate it that way. Yeah. Dynamic EQ. This is a really cool tool. Again, you could probably get this one for $30 or $50 on sale. It's basically combining an EQ and a compressor, right? But it's allowing you to compress certain frequency ranges. So these top two, the number 3 and the number 6, I'm just using as a normal EQ, right? But you see this number 2 bouncing around. It's acting as a compressor in that frequency range. And you might want to use this for a vocal that if they really lean into the microphone, that low end gets really boomy and too much. But then when they're away from the microphone, you lose it. You don't want to cut it all out permanently, because then when they back off, then you've lost any of that 200 range, right? But just like a compressor, you can tell it if this range between 80 and 250 hertz hits a certain threshold, it will begin reducing that gain, just like a compressor would do. Yeah.
Premiere calls it a parametric equalizer. I don't think it's the same as the dynamic. Is that just a normal equalizer?
So a parametric is just a normal equalizer. It does not have the dynamic functions. It's just a normal. The parametric is basically saying you can create these bands and sweep them. Yeah, as where like a graphic EQ is more old school, and you literally reduce it by a fixed band at a fixed frequency. People aren't really using graphic EQs except in the live space anymore because these parametrics have become so dynamic in use. So this is just a really great tool. If you're just wanting to limit or compress certain frequencies, you can do that without affecting the entire track and the entire vocal. This one's called the F6 Floating Band Dynamic EQ. Waves also, I don't know if Waves makes it, but they sell it through their marketplace. And it's a really good one. This is a good de-esser that I like to use. A lot of built-in de-essers. The one in Premiere is okay, but a lot of them don't do a great job. This one is called Sibilance, made by Waves. And again, it's just a compressor, but it's just compressing those S's. And you can dial it into taste. It's only got a couple of knobs. You can't screw anything up here. You can only dial it into what sounds the best. With de-essers, you never want to overdo them because then you can lose a lot of clarity. So you really just have to dial it in to where it's doing just the right amount of compression without just completely destroying that range in their vocal. Any questions about de-esser? Okay, I'm trying to move quick. This is a cool one to do on your music tracks, on your ambient effects and things like that. Both Premiere, DaVinci, everybody now has a stereo widening tool built in. This is another way to create space in your mix. So music tracks are stereo, right? This effect is basically widening that stereo effect. Your dialogue is always going to come down the center of your audio, right? It's a mono signal. It's going to come down the center of your speakers. Music is coming down the left and right, right? This widening tool can help widen that out and create more space in the center. So if you're having a hard time getting the vocals to cut through, on top of EQing your music, you can also widen it out to move it to the periphery and keep your vocal clear in the center. And so this one actually moved the width. You can see it will show you where the audio is on the stereoscopic space. Too wide, it sounds ridiculous. So you do have to be careful with this one. It can sound, especially in headphones, because the source is so close to your ears. If you go fully wide, it's a little discombobulating. So use this one. I would never set this at 100. Anywhere from 0 to 40 is probably just a good, nice place to put it to create some of that space.
Is that DaVinci or is that?
This is built into DaVinci, yes. Premiere also has it. I don't think it's a standalone tool. It's part of their mastering plugin. So look for their mastering plugin. It will have a stereo width option in that. There are also some good third-party plugins, but the built-in ones do really well. Another thing you can add to your music and sound effects is reverb. When we think about reverb in the dialogue sense, we usually don't want the reverb, right? We want clean, consistent, tight vocals. But with music or sound effects, again, when those can sit right on top of everything else, you can add reverb to it to push it further back. So if you had a 3D space for the sound, when you add reverb, you're pushing it towards the back of the room, right? And this is a lot of knobs. Just start with a preset up top. There'll be tons of presets, and then just dial it in a taste. Again, this has an output knob at the end. I would never just put reverb on the music and let it go 100%, right? You can dial it back so it still has some of that original kind of closeness to it, and you can dial that mix in to kind of create that space that you're wanting to create. So you can really use reverb creatively, even though we don't typically want it on our dialogue. And then the last thing is a master limiter. Again, we're at a point in audio where people are just trying to make things as loud as possible, especially like electronic music artists. They want their drops to absolutely destroy you. This is a plugin that does that really well. You can put this on your master bus, right? You can add effects to your master fader just like you can an individual track. What this will do, it's a couple of sliders. There's a lot going on here, but for the most part, these two sliders, that threshold, as you bring it down, will raise the overall mix, and that out ceiling will keep it from clipping. So you'll hear a lot of music producers refer to something like this as glue, adding glue to the mix. If your dialogue and your music and everything feel completely separated and not part of the same mix, this helps kind of glue that together so that it feels a little bit more cohesive. Adobe also, you could use a regular compressor for this if you wanted to, but this is just designed specifically to get as much volume out of it as possible. Adobe's mastering plugin that has that stereo width also does a similar thing. Their mastering plugin is really good. So if you're using Premiere, I would encourage you to always use it on your master bus. And you want to set it up before you start mixing. You don't want to mix your entire video and then add it. Because again, having this on your master bus is going to affect the sound of the overall video. So get this set about where you think you're going to want your final volume to be on your master bus. That way it's already affecting everything else. The last thing you want to do is get it near perfect, and then your 12 dB from that -1 that you want it to be at. Then you add this, and it changes the sound completely of everything you just did. So it's important to have these plugins on as you work. So that's all I've got. We are a little over time. I appreciate people asking questions as we went, but are there any other questions I can answer? We've got some time, so.
So actually, I'm going to actually interject with that. We do have time, so you're welcome to kind of ask questions, but we're going to thank Sam actually, completely as far as being here and presenting all the information. We're really thankful for you.
Thank you.
Token of some appreciation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I want to just interject with the questions because I want to just make an announcement for things to consider tonight as we move forward. Please take your time to continue to visit with our corporate partners. If there's equipment that you're wanting to test out, loan out, camera cleans should be completed, so you're going to pick that up shortly in a little bit. But we are going to be on BYU's campus tomorrow, so we will not really be available for the corporate partners. So if you're hanging out again in the morning, no, you won't. So make sure you grab something that you need from them. They're here, and it's pretty incredible to have some of the equipment that we have. And they're just like, yeah, here, take this. I'm like, okay. So take advantage of that. This will be kind of the last opportunity for that. And then we'll have dinner back in the grand ballroom. And then we'll go hear Dan Winters speak. And then after that, we'll have hospitality at the hotel where Sam can continue to answer questions. You'll be there, right?
I will be there.
If you have any more of those questions hospitality, we can get those done here. So you are welcome to go or stay or ask questions, but I wanted to just let you know that.
This is my contact info. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. Find me here, find me at hospitality, or shoot me an email. I'm always willing to help if people have questions. Audio can be daunting, so you don't have to do it alone. So thank you guys for coming.